Welcome to the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels that they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across a table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. So before getting into this episode and entering into a discussion on the 12th and final step in the AA 12-step program, I do want to take a moment to kind of put out a disclaimer for this episode. So I've said it often in the past, but as I sit down and think through and plan out these episodes for Chapter 3 Stigma, both the writing in the newsletter as well as the topics in the podcast, I am always thinking about myself when I was at my hardest and most difficult moments in my battle with addiction and with alcoholism. I often will close my eyes and see myself curled up in my basement, suffering through the symptoms of detox, and just thinking about how to structure and deliver a message that would have resonated with me. Now, the disclaimer for this particular episode and other episodes to come regarding the 12th step is I am not targeting myself in that situation as I structure and put together these episodes. I actually think in a big way, these coming episodes are going to be more for the unexpected follower and people that have reached out to me as I have built and grown this body of work. And that is the loved ones of alcoholics or addicts that have found themselves to the podcast or to the newsletter as they have desperately searched for and sought to understand that the struggle that their loved one is going through. And we'll get into it in the discussion, but the topic of the 12th step, again, it being the last one in the program, a never-ending one, mind you, but nonetheless, the last one in the progression of the step work. I just want to recognize that it doesn't resonate with the audience and the intent that I originally set out to build this podcast and this body of work for. However, I have been quite shocked and amazed at the response and the amount that folks have reached out to me from the standpoint of how this work has helped them connect with and understand battles that their loved ones are going through. So I did kind of want to make that clear here at the front of this episode. I think this might be, of all the podcasts and even of all the writing that I've done in this space up to this point, I think this might be the most impactful and critical episode for loved ones of addicts to listen to, purely because you are going to hear and understand how those of us who have found the solution to our addiction, who find ourselves in a place living a life we never dreamed, never could have imagined, entirely free of the urges, desires, pulls, cravings of our drug of choice, living a freedom that we never thought possible, how we are instructed to engage with those that are suffering. And I think that detail and information can help you as a loved one, family, friend of an addict or alcoholic figure out how to engage with them. Before getting into the book here and the topic of the 12th step, I just want to recognize that as a loved one of an addict, I think I can genuinely say you might be in one of the hardest positions that you could possibly find yourself in life. I look back and reflect on the relationships and the engagements that I had with family and friends over the years. And it pains me to say, but the ones who were the bravest, the ones who took a stand and ultimately did plant a seed of an idea in my mind that took years and years to grow and finally develop into something that allowed me to accept my alcoholism, they took the brunt of my force and my wrath and my lashing out at them. It takes incredible bravery and courage to be able to continue a relationship with an addict and an alcoholic, and to do so well. And I think one thing that needs to be stated is there is no perfect way of doing this. I've now witnessed, experienced hundreds of, and heard about hundreds of relationships that have gone on within the space of alcoholism and addiction. And there is no one size fits all. There is no perfect approach to it. And so as a loved one of an addict, make sure that you're giving yourself grace and forgiveness. And we'll get into it in detail in the reading here. But it requires patience oftentimes, and that can be the most difficult part of the entire endeavor and of the continued relationship with an alcoholic or an addict. So with that, we are going to get into chapter 7 of the big book, which is titled Working with Others. This entire chapter is built around the 12th step. And so before getting into chapter 7, I'm going to start just by reading over step 12. To the step. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now to the book. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help them when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. To come out of the book here for a moment, it's going to be mentioned and said here numerous times in this chapter, and I'm going to continue to highlight it. The idea that experience shows, experience will tell, and the concept of experience. As I have started to engage with others on a one-on-one basis, or just with how I structure and deliver the message through chapter 3 Stigma, I always hearken back to experience. There's a saying in AA, you cannot give that which you do not possess. And I so strongly believe it. I have in the past, before I found a solution to my alcoholism, while I was in the throes of my own personal battle, I attempted to help somebody else. And it was the absolute worst case disaster for both of us. It drove me further into despair and struggles with my own alcoholism, and it drove them further into despair. It doesn't work when someone who has not connected with and fully understands the road to redemption, the actual solution, when they try to engage with someone who is at their jumping off point. And so for me, when it comes to engagement with other alcoholics and addicts, it is my sole responsibility that if I say a statement, if I make a statement or a profession, that I always have to tie it back to some sort of experience that I have had, either in my battle or in finding myself on the road of recovery. And so this idea of tying things back to experience is absolutely critical when it comes to the 12th step. Back to the book. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot in our lives. And to come out of the book, it is the most incredible experience to watch someone enter into the world of active recovery and to physically see the change in how they carry themselves. And for me, the most incredible and telling feature that change is happening is looking into somebody's eyes. Now, I had my own experience in this case where I forced myself to make eye contact with myself and talk to myself while I was in rehab, while looking in the mirror. I noticed the change in my own eyes. I actually, to this day, have the photo that they took of me when the day I entered into rehab. And every once in a while, I will go and look at it, and I look at my eyes, and I note the change. I truly believe this is my favorite part of being in the AA program and of working in and living in the space of recovery, is to see the change in people's eyes, to watch their face lighten and brighten up. It is truly the best part of being in recovery for me. Now back to the book. And I'm going to set up here. The book is about to get into how you actually engage with what is called like a newcomer or somebody new to the space of recovery. It's also going to hit on the family engagement and dynamic. And so I'll just highlight that because I am going to be skipping sections and portions of this chapter as we go through here. So now back to the book. Don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. To be helpful is our only aim. And coming out of the book just for a second here, one note that I have here regarding being helpful, and this is something I think about constantly as I engage with others, be willing to go first and then listen. And so what I mean by that is I am always willing to offer up my own experience, my own struggles, my own shortcomings to show the person that I'm engaging with, that I'm working with, that it is all right to be honest about your battles and about your struggles. And once again, I always fall back to actual lived and learned experiences. And back to the book. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. This advice is given for his family also. They should be patient, realizing they are dealing with a sick person. And coming out of the book, I just want to highlight, this is possibly the most very difficult aspect of being the loved one or having a loved one that is an addict or an alcoholic. The patience is excruciating, and I truly can only say that in reflecting back on the journey that my own family and friends went on as they stayed with me throughout that time. And as I've noted, relationships changed. Things were impacted. Some relationships were lost. Others have been being worked or are being worked as I found myself in recovery. But for those that were closest to me, they really persevered. And I honestly, I look back, I reflect back on it, and it just amazes me, their level of perseverance and grit, to just stick with me and try to figure out what the right time was to inject their concerns and raise these questions that eventually did get me walking through the doors of rehab. Now back to the book. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask him if he wants to quit for good and if he would go to any extreme to do so. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others and who will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. Now, coming out of the book, in reading through this chapter, this paragraph really stood out to me because I genuinely believe this is the hope and vision of Chapter 3, Stigma, is that someday, in some manner, I don't need to know you personally. I don't need to have ever crossed paths with you. I don't even need to live in the same country as you. But if there's someone out there who is struggling that hits this period, they call it out as a lucid period, but like to describe it is during that detox period when you are just suffering through the agony and the hell that gets created, and your mind, your like true authentic self starts taking over in a very, very desperate manner and plea, because it feels like your alcoholic addict side has just beat you down again and again and again and again. And this authentic you that still lives, as weak and as impaired as it might feel in that moment, there is an upswell in energy and willingness to sacrifice so much to figure out a solution, because it is that authentic self that suffers through these moments of detox in this lucid period that they discuss. And for those of you that might not be addicts or alcoholics, the only way that I can really describe it is based on how I've experienced and seen it with other people, where it's just like, you know, they wake up the next day after a rough night or something and just have that moment where they say, maybe jokingly, but, oh God, that was rough. I'm never drinking again. That is the moment of opportunity. And that is where, again, that authentic self that might be so weak and beaten down does have a chance to allow the alcoholic to be willing. Now back to the book. If he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. Neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Coming out of the book here, or you can send them a podcast episode that stands out to you. Again, these paragraphs here are really hitting on what I hope the vision, or what I have as a vision for this work. Back to the book. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things, but urge them not to be over anxious, for that might spoil matters. Once again, coming out of the book, I just want to detail how things happened in my life and in my journey to recovery. And I don't say this to create fear or anxiousness in loved ones who are maybe now just entering into that, what they feel like is initial stage of addressing this issue. And again, I hope by talking about and destigmatizing some of these, that your timeline can be accelerated. My wish and my hope is that no one has to suffer through what I did and what my family did. But it was well back for me. So in mid-2023 is when I finally entered into recovery. It was 2015, the first time that my dad and I sat down, and he looked across the table at me and he asked me point blank if I had a problem with alcohol, or if I thought I had a problem with alcohol, and if I was an alcoholic. That conversation was actually preceded by another conversation that I had with my mom in 2011. And this was right on the cusp of when I would say I was becoming an alcoholic. And once again, we had an opportunity to be one-on-one, and it was a very different setting than the setting with my dad, but it was a very similar conversation. Just asking the question, asking what I thought, asking why it seemed like I struggled, asking why it seemed like consequences kept happening to me. And I handled both of those conversations in a very similar manner, where I felt immediate fear and embarrassment, and I stumbled about trying to find excuses and trying to figure out what I could possibly say to quell their concerns and ultimately to get myself out of the conversation. And I promised some surface level things and changes to come about, and I really focused on making those changes in the weeks and months after those conversations. But I was doing it because I didn't want to disappoint them. I didn't want to make them nervous. I wanted to get them and others that I know were talking about it off of my back and lower the concern about if Kyle does have a problem with alcohol. Is Kyle an alcoholic? And I know that there might have been feelings that, well, those initial conversations and subsequent conversations from that point on with family and other friends were never successful. But in the long arc of my story, they actually were, because they planted the seed. They got me questioning things. They started getting me to have those uncomfortable feelings in the days after a drinking spree. And while the struggle was drawn out and dangerous and long, it was in a large way because of being approached, because of them having the bravery and the courage to ask those questions that no parent wants to ever have to ask their child. Was the seed planted and the potential for recovery created? Hey folks, I just wanted to drop in with an ask for help. If you're enjoying and finding value from this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and a written review. Whether this episode is allowing you to connect with the struggles that a loved one may be going through, or allowing you to see yourself through the story of someone else, the ratings and reviews allow the work to be made more readily available for those who are searching for a solution. Love to you all for the incredible support of this work and the meaning and hope that it provides. With that, back to the book. Usually the family should not try to tell your story. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel he can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed. And I'm going to pause there and come out of the book and actually wrap up this episode here at this point. And I'm going to highlight on a few things that I've said in some part, but just are so imperative. Giving the alcoholic the agency to face and address the question on their own is one of the biggest differences that I've seen between those where recovery sticks and those that are being sober to appease somebody else. Now, that being said, I want to fully acknowledge that the only reason that I walked through the front doors of rehab on May 15th of 2023 was because I was in that period of lucidness. I was coming down. I felt desperate. I felt like I couldn't go on anymore on my own. However, something else that I felt in the back of my mind, because I had about 24 hours between the time that I agreed to go into rehab and when I actually walked through the doors, I assumed I would find an excuse. And it was during that period that my family stepped in and they supported me and they addressed any excuse or reason that I would come up with as to why I had to delay or why it wasn't reasonable and why it would totally ruin my life and my career. Every single obstacle that I created in my mind as to why I shouldn't go was worked around and worked through with the love and the support of those around me who cared for me. And they guided me through those 24 hours. And I think they saw it and maybe felt it themselves. And not that I was coming up with these excuses in a combative way, because again, I had committed and agreed to going in, but I was fearful. I was more fearful in those 24 hours than I have been in my entire life. And without the support of them in those critical moments, I don't think that I could be where I am right now. And so I just want to wrap and once again commend those of you who have found this work and are finding value in it from the standpoint of being able to learn about the mindset, the thought process, and the suffering that your loved one may be going through. I want to commend you for your spirit and your determination. And know that if you are there for an addict and an alcoholic, you're there for a reason. You're there because you know that there's an authentic person deep down inside them. As hidden as it may feel sometimes because of the substance and the disease, you're there because you know that that's down there in there. There are times where that belief is one of the only things that we as addicts and alcoholics can cling to. And it is sometimes a belief from others that allow us to start picking up and standing up on our own 2 feet. And know that the road is rocky and treacherous. Even after someone might admit that they have a problem, there are relationships to mend. Like I said, assume every relationship is changed. But things can strengthen. Relationships can grow and flourish. And so with that, that's all I've got for this episode. Thank you all very much. All my love to you. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others who might find it impactful. And give us a rating through your streaming platform of choice. Ratings and comments help spread the work to others who are desperately searching for a solution. This simple action could have profound impacts on the lives of others. My hope is that my story can help those who feel alone in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and know that this life is full of abundant joy and wonder and is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you must endure. Until next time.